Everything you've been told about death is a carefully constructed lie, not a mistake, not incomplete information, a deliberate deception designed to keep you trapped in fear. For 50 years, the most revolutionary insights about consciousness and the afterlife have been buried, dismissed, and actively suppressed. Why? Because Seth, an entity channeled through Jane Roberts from 1963 to 1984, revealed truths that would completely dismantle the power structures built on your terror of dying. While mainstream science maps the physical universe, Seth mapped consciousness itself. He provided specific, verifiable details about the nature of reality that made religious institutions and materialist science equally uncomfortable. His teachings weren't mystical platitudes, they were practical blueprints for understanding how consciousness operates beyond physical death. The suppression wasn't accidental. When you understand what actually happens when you die, you stop being controllable, you stop fearing, you start living as the powerful, eternal being you actually are. What I'm about to share will fundamentally change how you see death, life, and your own unlimited nature. The evidence has been hiding in plain sight for decades. Now here's where everything you've been taught about existence gets turned completely upside down. Seth didn't just challenge our beliefs about death, he shattered the entire foundation of how we understand reality itself. Think about this for a moment. Every single day, you wake up assuming that your brain creates your thoughts, that your physical body is who you really are, and that the world around you exists independently of your mind. Seth's teachings reveal this is backwards, completely backwards. According to Seth, consciousness doesn't emerge from your brain like steam from a kettle. Your brain is actually more like a radio receiver, tuning into the signal of consciousness that already exists. You are not a physical being having occasional spiritual experiences. You are consciousness itself, temporarily focused into this physical reality for a very specific purpose. This isn't just philosophical speculation. Seth provided detailed explanations of how this actually works. He described how your thoughts don't just reflect reality, they literally construct it, moment by moment. Every belief you hold, every expectation you carry, every emotional pattern you repeat becomes the blueprint for what you experience. But here's the crucial part that most people miss when they hear, you create your own reality. This isn't about positive thinking or visualization techniques. This is a fundamental law of existence that operates whether you believe it or not, whether you're aware of it or not. Right now, as you're listening to this, your consciousness is actively creating your next moment of experience based on your deepest beliefs about what's possible. Seth gave specific examples of how this works. A person who deeply believes they're unlucky will unconsciously make choices and focus on information that confirms this belief. They'll notice every small mishap, remember every disappointment, and literally magnetize situations that match their internal conviction. It's not that bad things happen to them randomly. They're unconsciously participating in creating those experiences because that's what their belief system expects. The same mechanism works in reverse. Someone who genuinely believes in their own capability and worth will find opportunities appearing, will notice helpful resources, and will make decisions that lead to positive outcomes. Not because they're thinking positive thoughts, but because their consciousness is operating from a different set of core assumptions about reality. This is exactly why traditional science struggles so much with consciousness studies. If consciousness creates physical reality rather than emerging from it, then the entire materialist worldview collapses. And that worldview is what keeps people feeling powerless, dependent on external authorities to tell them what's real and what's possible. Think about the implications. If you're creating your reality through consciousness, then you're not a victim of random circumstances. You're not at the mercy of genetics, environment, or social conditions. You're a powerful creative being who chose to be here, in this specific situation, for reasons that serve your soul's development. Seth explained that before we're born into physical life, we actually choose our circumstances, not as punishment, but as learning opportunities. We select the family, the cultural context, even the challenges we'll face, because these provide the exact conditions we need for the experiences we want to have. A soul might choose a difficult childhood not because it deserves suffering, but because overcoming those challenges will develop specific strengths and insights. This knowledge was systematically suppressed because it fundamentally threatens every power structure on this planet. If people truly understood that they create their own reality through consciousness, they would stop looking to governments, religions, medical establishments, and media for salvation. They would take complete responsibility for their experience and start consciously directing their creative power. But there's an even deeper layer to this. Seth taught that time itself isn't linear the way we experience it. All of your so-called past lives and future lives are actually happening simultaneously in different probable realities. Right now, there are other versions of you living different choices, exploring different possibilities. The you that exists in this moment is just one focal point of a much larger consciousness that spans multiple realities. This is the kind of profound knowledge we explore in depth at Insights Academy, where we can discuss concepts that are too revolutionary for mainstream platforms. The ancient text called the Kabbalion, which we study there, contains similar principles about consciousness and reality creation that were hidden from public view for good reason. When you understand that consciousness operates outside of time and space, suddenly the whole question of what happens after death becomes much more interesting. If you're already creating your reality through consciousness while you're alive, what do you think happens to that creative power when your physical body stops functioning? The materialist view says consciousness simply ends when the brain dies. But if consciousness was never produced by the brain in the first place, if it's actually the fundamental creative force that constructs physical reality, then death becomes something entirely different. It becomes a transition from one state of consciousness to another. Not an ending, but a transformation. Seth described death as simply dropping the physical focus. Like taking off a heavy coat you no longer need, the consciousness that you really are continues, along with all its creative abilities, all its accumulated knowledge, all its capacity to construct experience. But now it's operating in a different kind of reality, one that's much more responsive to thought and intention. This is why understanding consciousness as the primary creative force is so crucial. It's not just changing how you live, it's changing how you die. And more importantly, it's changing what you discover exists beyond death. The people who've had near-death experiences and come back reporting elaborate spiritual realms, encounters with deceased relatives, life reviews, and choices about whether to return, they're not hallucinating. They're experiencing what consciousness creates when it's no longer filtered through physical brain limitations. They're getting a preview of the reality you construct when thought becomes immediately manifest. But here's what they don't tell you in those feel-good near-death experience books. The reality you create after death is still based on your beliefs, your expectations, your level of understanding about consciousness itself. If you die believing in judgment and punishment, you'll create experiences that match those beliefs. If you die terrified and confused, you'll construct realities that reflect that confusion. This is why Seth's teachings were so dangerous to established powers. They don't just promise a better afterlife, they explain exactly how consciousness works so you can take control of both your life and your death experience. They turn you from a passive victim into an active creator, both here and in whatever comes next. Here's what makes Seth's account so extraordinary and so threatening to established religious doctrine. Seth isn't offering theories about the afterlife. He's not speculating or interpreting ancient texts. He's reporting directly from the other side as a consciousness who has experienced death and moved beyond physical existence. When Seth describes what happens after we die, he speaks with the authority of someone who has been there. And what he reveals challenges every single assumption we've been taught about death, judgment, and the afterlife. The moment of death itself, according to Seth, is far gentler than most people fear. There's no dramatic tunnel of light for everyone. No immediate confrontation with a bearded deity holding a ledger of your sins. Instead, Seth describes a gradual transition that unfolds over roughly 3 days, though time as we understand it becomes increasingly meaningless. During this 3-day period, consciousness slowly realizes it's no longer tethered to a physical body. Some souls understand this immediately, especially those who've prepared for death or studied consciousness. Others take longer to grasp their new reality. Seth explains that many newly deceased continue trying to interact with their physical environment, attempting to speak with loved ones who can no longer hear them in the usual way. But here's where Seth's teachings become revolutionary. The environment you first encounter after death isn't predetermined by some cosmic authority. You create it yourself, based entirely on your beliefs and expectations. This is consciousness creating reality taken to its ultimate expression. If you're a devout Christian expecting to meet Jesus at pearly gates, that's exactly what you'll initially experience. Your consciousness will construct that familiar scenario because it matches your belief system. Muslims might find themselves in their version of paradise, complete with the imagery they've been taught to expect. The experience feels completely real because, in terms of consciousness, it is real. Seth describes how materialists, those who believed consciousness ended at death, often create hospital-like environments or find themselves in scenarios that feel like recovering from a medical procedure. Their consciousness needs time to adjust to the reality that they still exist, so it creates familiar, medical frameworks to make sense of continued awareness. This isn't deception or divine accommodation. It's consciousness naturally creating experience based on belief, just as it does in physical life, but without the constraints of physical matter to slow down the process. The life review Seth describes bears no resemblance to the judgment scenarios taught by traditional religions. There's no external judge reviewing your moral report card. Instead, it's a natural expansion of awareness where you experience the full impact of every choice you made during your physical lifetime. But here's the profound part. You don't just review your own experience. You literally experience your life from the perspective of everyone you affected. When you showed kindness to a stranger, you feel their gratitude and how it changed their day. When you spoke harshly to someone, you experience their hurt exactly as they felt it. Every action ripples outward, and you become aware of consequences you never imagined while alive. This isn't punishment, it's education. Seth emphasizes that this review happens in an atmosphere of complete understanding and compassion. You're not being judged, you're learning. The goal isn't to make you feel guilty, but to help you understand the true interconnectedness of all consciousness and the real impact of your choices. Some souls, according to Seth, become temporarily stuck after death, but not because they've sinned or failed some cosmic test. They get trapped by rigid belief systems that can't accommodate their new reality. A person who believed absolutely that death meant eternal punishment might create that experience for themselves, not because they deserve it, but because their consciousness can't conceive of any other possibility. Seth describes belief system territories in the afterlife, areas where similar-minded souls gather. These aren't permanent destinations, but temporary way stations where consciousness can gradually expand beyond limiting beliefs. A fundamentalist might spend time in a territory that matches their earthly religious expectations, slowly learning that reality is far more expansive and loving than they imagined. Communication in the afterlife doesn't rely on words or language. Seth explains that consciousness communicates through direct transfer of meaning, emotion, and imagery. Complete concepts, along with all their emotional content, can be shared instantly. This is why near-death experiencers often struggle to describe their encounters. They're trying to translate multi-dimensional communication into linear language. Time operates completely differently after death. Seth describes how consciousness can simultaneously review past life experiences while beginning to plan future incarnations. What appears to be sequential from our physical perspective happens in overlapping, interconnected ways. You might spend what feels like years reviewing your relationships while also exploring potential future life scenarios. Love connections don't end with physical death. Seth reveals that we maintain bonds with those we care about, whether they're still in physical form or have also transitioned. We can influence and be influenced by loved ones across the physical-non-physical divide. Many people sense departed family members or receive guidance from them because this connection is real and ongoing. The reason these teachings have been suppressed becomes crystal clear when you understand their implications. If people knew that their beliefs literally create their afterlife experience, if they understood that there's no external judgment but rather natural consequences and learning opportunities, if they realized that consciousness continues and grows beyond physical death, entire religious power structures would crumble overnight. Churches, mosques, and temples have built their authority on claiming exclusive knowledge about the afterlife. They've used fear of judgment and promises of salvation to control behavior and extract resources. Seth's direct reports from non-physical reality expose these claims as elaborate control mechanisms with no basis in actual afterlife experience. When you understand that your consciousness creates your reality both during physical life and after death, when you realize that growth and learning continue in expanded ways beyond the physical, when you grasp that love and connection transcend death itself, You no longer need intermediaries, claiming to hold the keys to your eternal fate. This is why Seth's teachings remained buried for decades. This is why they're still marginalized today. They don't just challenge religious doctrine, they completely eliminate the need for it. Here's the uncomfortable truth that religious institutions have spent centuries trying to hide. They've built their entire power structure on deliberately distorting what actually happens after death, and Seth's teachings expose exactly how they've done it. Now, before we go further, let me be clear about something. I'm not saying every religious person is wrong, or that there's no wisdom in spiritual traditions. Many contain fragments of genuine truth, pieces of the larger puzzle that Seth revealed in complete detail. But here's what happened. Human institutions took these fragments and twisted them into tools of control. Think about it. What's the most effective way to control someone? Make them afraid of what they can't see or verify for themselves. Make them dependent on you for their salvation. And that's exactly what organized religion has done with death and the afterlife. Seth explained this with startling clarity. He said that concepts like eternal damnation, divine judgment, and the need for salvation through specific rituals are human constructs, not spiritual realities. They don't exist in the afterlife he actually experienced and described. Remember from what we covered earlier, when consciousness leaves the physical body, there's no cosmic courtroom waiting. No angry deity with a checklist of your failures. Instead, Seth revealed something far more profound and actually more challenging. You become your own judge through the expanded awareness that naturally occurs after death. You see your life from all perspectives, including those you may have hurt. You understand the full consequences of your actions and thoughts, but this isn't punishment from an external source. It's the natural result of consciousness expanding beyond the limitations of physical existence. This is why religious authorities found Seth's teachings so threatening. He was removing their monopoly on spiritual truth. No more need for intermediaries. No more paying for forgiveness. No more living in fear of breaking arbitrary rules created by men who claim to speak for God. Let me give you a specific example of how this distortion works. Take the concept of sin. Seth taught that what religions label as sin is actually ignorance, a misunderstanding of our true nature as consciousness. We make mistakes. Yes. We cause harm. Absolutely. But these aren't cosmic crimes requiring divine forgiveness. They're learning experiences that consciousness uses to grow and evolve. The real tragedy, religious guilt and fear, create actual barriers to spiritual growth, both in life and after death. Seth described how people who die carrying intense religious programming often create hellish experiences for themselves, not because they're being punished, but because their beliefs literally shape their after-death reality. Here's where it gets really interesting. Seth explained that multiple religions can be simultaneously true within their believer's experience, because consciousness creates reality according to belief. A devout Christian might initially experience something resembling their version of heaven. A Buddhist might encounter what they expect from the bardos. But these are temporary states, training wheels that consciousness eventually outgrows as it expands into fuller awareness. The concepts of heaven and hell that religions describe, they're actually descriptions of self-created states of consciousness that exist both during life and after death. You can create your own hell right here on earth through guilt, fear, and rigid thinking. And you can create your own heaven through love, understanding, and expanded awareness. But here's what really exposes the whole system. Most priests, ministers, and religious authorities have no more actual knowledge about the afterlife than their followers. Their certainty isn't based on experience. It's based on doctrine written by other humans who also had no direct experience. It's blind leading the blind, with everyone pretending they can see. Seth pointed out something that should make every religious person pause. Some of the most spiritually advanced beings he encountered had never belonged to organized religions. Meanwhile, some religious leaders created the most hellish after-death experiences for themselves because their rigid beliefs became prisons for their consciousness. This is exactly why Jane Roberts faced such fierce opposition. Publishers wouldn't touch the Seth books for years. Religious groups tried to have them banned. Academic institutions dismissed them without investigation. Because Seth's teachings do something that threatens every power structure built on spiritual fear and dependency. They validate personal spiritual experience over institutional authority. Seth taught that you have direct access to spiritual truth. You don't need anyone to interpret it for you. You don't need to follow specific rituals or believe particular doctrines to have a positive after-death experience. Your consciousness is naturally equipped to navigate these realities. It's been doing so between physical incarnations for eons. The real kicker? Many of the experiences that religions attribute to divine intervention, mystical visions, prophetic dreams, healing phenomena, are actually natural abilities of consciousness that we all possess. But religions have convinced people these experiences only come through their specific channels, requiring their specific interpretations. Consider how this plays out in real life. How many people have stayed in abusive relationships because their religion told them divorce was sinful? How many have rejected their natural sexuality because authorities claimed it offended God? How many have lived in constant fear, trying to earn salvation they already possessed? Seth revealed that consciousness is inherently valuable and eternal. You don't need to earn your worth through good deeds or lose it through mistakes. You don't need saving, you need understanding. You don't need forgiveness from an external source. You need to forgive yourself and learn from your experiences. This is why the Seth material remained underground for so long. It doesn't just challenge religious authority, it eliminates the need for it entirely. When you understand that consciousness creates reality, that death is simply a transition to expanded awareness, and that you have direct access to spiritual truth, the whole fear-based control system collapses. The most liberating part? Seth's teachings don't require faith. They invite investigation. Test them against your own experience. Pay attention to your dreams, your intuitions, your moments of expanded awareness. You'll start recognizing the truth for yourself. And that's exactly what we're going to explore next. The specific techniques Seth provided for accessing these expanded states of consciousness while still in physical form, and why these methods work when traditional religious practices often fall short. Now, here's where Seth's teachings move beyond philosophy into something the scientific establishment absolutely refuses to acknowledge: verifiable proof that consciousness survives physical death. And I'm not talking about feel-good spiritual platitudes here. I'm talking about hard evidence that could be tested, confirmed, and replicated by anyone willing to look at the data. Seth didn't just make grand claims about the afterlife. Through Jane Roberts, he provided specific, testable information that she had no normal way of knowing. Historical details about people and events she'd never studied. Scientific insights that wouldn't be discovered by mainstream science for decades. Personal information about deceased individuals that could be verified through research. Take the case of Seth's detailed descriptions of 17th century life in a small English village. He provided names, dates, specific architectural details, and social customs that Jane Roberts had never encountered in her reading. When researchers followed up, they found historical records confirming these obscure details in archives that weren't even publicly accessible at the time. How does a housewife from upstate New York access information locked away in British historical societies? But it goes deeper. Seth explained that consciousness operates on electromagnetic frequencies that our current scientific instruments can't detect directly, but which leave measurable effects in the physical world. He described consciousness as a form of electromagnetic reality that exists independently of brain tissue. This was in the 1960 seconds, decades before quantum physics research began exploring the electromagnetic properties of consciousness and the role of bioelectricity in neural function. Modern neuroscience now confirms that consciousness generates measurable electromagnetic fields. The brain produces electrical activity that can be detected well beyond the skull. Recent studies show that these electromagnetic signatures continue to be measurable even in cases of clinical death, suggesting that consciousness may operate on frequencies that persist beyond biological function. Seth provided specific predictions about consciousness research that have since been validated. He predicted that science would discover consciousness affects physical matter at the quantum level. Today, quantum physics experiments consistently show that conscious observation influences the behavior of subatomic particles. The observer effect isn't just a quirky scientific anomaly, it's proof that consciousness and physical matter interact in ways that validate exactly what Seth taught. He also explained the mechanism behind reincarnation through what he called psychic archaeology. According to Seth, consciousness can access information from any time period, because all time exists simultaneously from the perspective of consciousness outside physical reality. This explains why people under hypnosis can recall historically accurate details from past lives, including specific names, locations, and cultural practices they've never studied. Researchers have documented thousands of cases where individuals recall past life memories that correlate with historical records. Children spontaneously remembering detailed information about deceased people they've never met. Phobias and talents that have no basis in current life experience but match traumatic events or skills from verifiable historical periods. Seth's framework provides the only coherent explanation for how consciousness could retain and access these memories across multiple lifetimes. The scientific establishment avoids consciousness research precisely because it validates everything Seth taught about survival after death. If consciousness exists independently of the brain, then death becomes simply a transition rather than an ending. This threatens the materialist worldview that underlies modern science and medicine. Seth's explanation of near-death experiences and out-of-body experiences as temporary separations of consciousness from the physical body has been supported by decades of research. People consistently report accurate observations of events occurring during clinical death, when brain activity is undetectable. They describe conversations and activities happening in other rooms, provide details about medical procedures performed on their unconscious bodies, and return with information they couldn't have acquired through normal sensory channels. Dr. Pim van Lommel's study of cardiac arrest patients found that consciousness continued during periods of clinical death when the brain showed no electrical activity. Patients accurately described events that occurred while they were clinically dead, suggesting that consciousness operates independently of brain function. This directly confirms Seth's teaching that consciousness is not produced by the brain but rather uses the brain as a temporary interface. Seth also explained how consciousness can influence physical matter even after death, accounting for documented cases of after-death communications and phenomena. Electromagnetic disturbances, temperature changes, and mechanical effects that occur during spiritual encounters aren't supernatural events. They're the natural result of consciousness interacting with physical matter through electromagnetic fields. Modern physics recognizes that consciousness and matter interact at the quantum level. If consciousness survives death, it retains the ability to influence electromagnetic fields and physical systems. This explains why electronic devices malfunction during spiritual encounters, why temperatures drop in the presence of spirits, and why physical objects can be moved or manipulated during after-death communications. The evidence for consciousness survival is overwhelming when you examine it objectively. Mediums consistently provide specific, verifiable information about deceased individuals that they couldn't have acquired through normal means. Instrumental transcommunication captures voices and images of deceased people through electronic devices. Cross-correspondences between multiple mediums provide coordinated messages that demonstrate organized intelligence beyond physical death. Seth's framework provides a scientific foundation for understanding all of these phenomena. Consciousness operates on electromagnetic frequencies that persist after biological death. These frequencies can interact with sensitive individuals, electronic equipment, and physical matter under the right conditions. What we call psychic phenomena, mediumship, and after-death communication are simply the natural operations of consciousness existing across different dimensional frequencies. The scientific proof is there for anyone willing to examine it honestly. Seth didn't ask people to believe blindly. He provided testable claims, verifiable predictions, and a coherent framework that explains phenomena mainstream science refuses to acknowledge. The evidence for consciousness survival has been accumulating for over 50 years since Seth first began teaching through Jane Roberts. What if I told you that right now, as you're listening to this, there are dozens of other versions of you living completely different lives in parallel realities? That the you who chose a different career path, married someone else, or moved to another country isn't just a fantasy, they're actually real. Living those experiences simultaneously in what Seth called probable realities. This is where Seth's teachings get truly mind-bending, and it's exactly why they've been kept from mainstream awareness for 5 decades. Because once you understand the true scope of your multidimensional existence, the illusion that you're just one small, powerless individual in a vast universe completely collapses. Seth explained that what we call past lives aren't actually past at all. They're happening right now, in parallel dimensions of experience. Time, as Seth described it, is like a vast landscape that consciousness can view from above. We experience it linearly because we're focused into this particular physical reality, but from the broader perspective of consciousness, all moments exist simultaneously. Think about this. Have you ever had a dream where you possessed knowledge or skills you don't have in waking life? Maybe you spoke a language fluently that you've never studied, or knew your way around a city you've never visited. Seth taught that these aren't random neural firings. They're glimpses of your probable selves, other versions of you who made different choices and developed different abilities. Jane Roberts herself experienced this repeatedly during the Seth sessions. She would suddenly have detailed knowledge about historical periods, scientific concepts, or philosophical frameworks that she had never studied. This wasn't channeling information from some external entity, it was accessing the broader network of her own multidimensional consciousness. Seth described reality as having multiple frameworks, like radio stations broadcasting on different frequencies. Physical reality is just one narrow band in an infinite spectrum of existence. Most people tune into only this one station their entire lives, never realizing there are countless others available. But here's where it gets really interesting. Seth taught that each of us is actually one aspect of a larger consciousness he called an entity. Imagine your individual personality as one finger on a hand. You have your own experiences and identity, but you're part of something much larger. This entity consciousness experiences multiple incarnations simultaneously across different time periods and realities. This explains phenomena that mainstream science can't touch. Why do some people seem to have natural talents they never developed? Why do certain places feel inexplicably familiar? Why do some individuals display knowledge or abilities that their life experience can't account for? They're tapping into the experiences of their other simultaneous selves. Seth described what he called inner senses, perceptual abilities that allow consciousness to operate beyond physical limitations. While we're focused in physical reality, these inner senses are largely dormant, though they occasionally break through in experiences of déjà vu, precognitive dreams, or sudden intuitive insights. After death, according to Seth, these inner senses become fully activated. This is why consciousness doesn't diminish after physical death. It actually expands, gaining access to perceptual abilities that were always there but temporarily limited by physical focus. Consider the implications. If you exist simultaneously in multiple realities, then death in this reality is simply a shift of focus, like changing the channel on that cosmic radio. The broader you continues in other dimensions of experience, with full access to the accumulated knowledge and abilities of all your probable selves. This multidimensional model explains psychic phenomena that materialist science dismisses. Telepathy isn't some mysterious force. It's consciousness operating across the boundaries between realities. Precognition isn't seeing the future. It's accessing information from probable selves who are experiencing different timelines. Remote viewing isn't supernatural. It's using the inner senses to perceive beyond physical location. Seth taught that advanced consciousness can exist in multiple realities simultaneously, which explains historical accounts of bilocation, saints, and mystics appearing in multiple locations at once. They weren't performing miracles, they were demonstrating the natural multidimensional nature of consciousness that we all possess. The reason you occasionally have the experience of remembering something that hasn't happened yet, or feeling like you've lived through a moment before, is because part of your consciousness is always operating across multiple probable realities. Sometimes the boundaries thin, and you get a glimpse of experiences from your other selves. Here's a practical way to understand this. Every major decision you face creates a branching point. In this reality, you choose one path. But Seth taught that other versions of you choose differently, and those choices are equally real, equally valid. The you who took that job overseas, who stayed in that relationship, who pursued that artistic dream, they're all living their experiences right now in parallel realities. This is why certain meditation practices, dream work, or even psychedelic experiences can feel like accessing other lives or realities. You're not imagining it. You're temporarily expanding your perceptual focus to include information from your other simultaneous selves. The suppression of this knowledge isn't accidental. If people understood that they exist as multidimensional beings with access to vast networks of knowledge and ability, the entire structure of institutional control would crumble. Why would you need external authorities to tell you what's true when you have access to unlimited sources of direct knowing? Why would you accept limitations on your potential when you understand that other versions of you have already transcended those limitations? Why would you fear death when you know it's simply a transition between different modes of consciousness? Seth's map of multiple realities reveals that you are far more than you've been taught to believe, and that recognition is the first step toward reclaiming your true multidimensional nature. The question isn't whether these other realities exist. The question is, are you ready to expand your awareness enough to access them? When Seth spoke through Jane Roberts about reincarnation, he shattered every religious and spiritual framework that had come before. This wasn't the Buddhist wheel of suffering you needed to escape, or the Hindu cycle of karmic debt you had to pay off. Seth revealed something far more profound and empowering: reincarnation as conscious choice. Think about how most people understand reincarnation. You live a life, accumulate good or bad karma, die, then get assigned your next life based on some cosmic scoring system. Be good, move up the ladder. Be bad, come back as something lower. It's essentially spiritual punishment and reward, keeping you trapped in an endless cycle of judgment. Seth demolished this entire concept. According to his teachings, there is no karmic debt collector in the sky keeping score. There's no spiritual hierarchy where you graduate from peasant to prince to enlightened being. Instead, your soul, what Seth called your entity, chooses each incarnation deliberately, selecting experiences that will provide specific types of growth and understanding. This changes everything about how we view difficult lives. That person born into poverty, facing seemingly insurmountable challenges, Seth taught that this soul chose those exact circumstances because they offered particular opportunities for development that couldn't be gained any other way. The wealthy individual who seems to have everything handed to them. They selected that experience to explore different aspects of consciousness, perhaps learning about responsibility, influence, or the challenges that come with abundance. But here's where Seth's teaching becomes truly revolutionary. He introduced the concept of value fulfillment, the idea that every consciousness has unique potential that it seeks to express and develop. Your soul doesn't reincarnate to pay debts or climb some spiritual ladder. It chooses physical reality because matter provides a specific kind of learning laboratory that doesn't exist in non-physical dimensions. In the afterlife dimensions Seth described in earlier sections, thought creates reality instantly, but in physical reality, there's a time lag between thought and manifestation. This delay creates consequences, teaches patience, develops emotional depth, and allows for the kind of character building that rapid-fire thought creation simply cannot provide. Your soul incarnates because physical reality offers irreplaceable educational value. Seth also revealed the intricate dynamics of soul families, groups of consciousness that repeatedly choose to incarnate together, playing different roles across multiple lifetimes. The person who's your mother in this life might have been your child, spouse, or best friend in previous incarnations. These soul groups work together across time, each member taking turns providing different types of challenges and support for the others. This explains those instant connections you feel with certain people, or the inexplicable tensions that arise with others despite no apparent reason. You're continuing relationships and working through dynamics that span multiple lifetimes, each incarnation offering new perspectives on the same fundamental connections. Seth's concept of old souls completely reframes traditional spiritual thinking. An old soul isn't someone who's lived more lifetimes than others. Instead, it's a personality that has integrated more awareness of their multidimensional nature into their current physical experience. Some people naturally access more of their entity's accumulated wisdom, making them seem wise beyond their years or unusually perceptive about human nature. Even more fascinating, Seth described cases of walk-ins and soul exchanges, rare situations where one consciousness steps out of a physical body and another steps in. This typically happens during near-death experiences, severe trauma, or major life transitions when the original personality has completed what it came to accomplish. The incoming consciousness continues the life with different goals and perspectives, often explaining dramatic personality changes that family and friends can't understand. Perhaps most mind-bending of all, Seth taught about simultaneous incarnations. Your entity consciousness isn't living one life at a time in linear sequence. Instead, it's experiencing multiple lifetimes simultaneously across different time periods and locations. What we perceive as past and future lives are actually happening now, in other dimensions of time that exist parallel to our current experience. This simultaneous existence explains why past life memories occasionally bleed through into current awareness. That inexplicable talent for music, that phobia of water with no apparent cause, that deep fascination with ancient Egypt, these could be crossover experiences from other incarnations your entity is living right now in different time frameworks. Seth explained that life purpose isn't some predetermined mission assigned by higher powers. Instead, it emerges from the dynamic interaction between your soul's broad intentions for incarnating and your personality's specific choices and responses. Your entity chooses general themes to explore, perhaps leadership, creativity, or healing, but your individual personality determines exactly how those themes get expressed through your unique circumstances and decisions. Even death timing and methods are chosen according to Seth. Souls select their exit points based on when they've accomplished their primary goals for that incarnation, or when their departure will serve the highest good of others involved in their life story. This doesn't mean suicide is predetermined or that accident victims chose their fate in some simplistic way. Rather, at levels beyond conscious awareness, consciousness orchestrates experiences that serve multiple purposes across interconnected lives and relationships. The implications are staggering. If Seth's teachings are accurate, you're not a victim of random circumstances or cosmic punishment. You're not dependent on external salvation or trapped in endless cycles of spiritual debt. Instead, you're a powerful consciousness deliberately exploring physical reality, learning through direct experience, and contributing to the evolution of awareness itself. This is exactly why religious institutions have suppressed and distorted reincarnation knowledge for centuries. If people understood that they're responsible for their own spiritual development, that they chose their circumstances for growth, and that they have the power to create their reality through understanding these principles, the entire structure of external spiritual authority would crumble. Seth's reincarnation teachings don't just explain where we've been or where we're going, they reveal who we actually are right now. Eternal consciousness temporarily focused in physical form, learning through matter what cannot be learned any other way, connected to vast networks of other souls, and participating in the grandest educational experiment ever conceived. Your current life isn't punishment for past mistakes or preparation for future rewards. It's a carefully chosen adventure in consciousness, designed by you for you, to fulfill potentials that exist nowhere else in all of creation. Look, there's something we need to talk about that's going to make some people very uncomfortable. After studying Seth's teachings for decades, I've come to realize that the suppression of death's true nature isn't accidental, it's systematic. And it runs deeper than most people want to acknowledge. Seth was crystal clear about this. The fear of death is the foundation stone of your civilization's control mechanisms. Think about that for a moment. Every major institution in our society benefits when you're terrified of dying. When you believe consciousness ends at physical death, you become infinitely more controllable. Let's start with the obvious culprits. Religious institutions have built entire empires on death anxiety. But here's what Seth revealed that shocked me. It's not just about selling salvation. Many religious leaders actively suppress information about the afterlife's true nature because informed congregants don't need intermediaries. If you knew you could communicate directly with non-physical consciousness, if you understood that your spiritual development was entirely in your hands, what would you need priests and pastors for? I've watched researchers present compelling evidence of consciousness survival at conferences, only to have religious authorities dismiss it because it doesn't match their doctrinal frameworks. Seth explained this perfectly. Your religions have made death into a mystery that only they can solve, when in fact it is the most natural transition you will ever make. But religion is just the tip of the iceberg. The medical establishment has built $1 trillion industry around death anxiety. Think about it. How much money is spent on anti-aging treatments, life extension therapies, and medications for death-related anxiety? I know people spending thousands monthly on supplements and treatments, driven by pure terror of physical dissolution. Here's what really opened my eyes. I started tracking research funding for consciousness studies versus funding for materialist neuroscience. The disparity is staggering. Universities receive massive grants to study the brain as a meat computer, but researchers investigating consciousness survival struggle for basic funding. Dr. Gary Schwartz at the University of Arizona told me directly that studying mediumship and afterlife communication is career suicide in most academic institutions. Seth addressed this specifically. Your educational systems are designed to produce workers, not thinkers. Teaching about consciousness survival would create individuals who cannot be controlled through fear of annihilation. When I look at standard psychology curricula, they spend months on behavioral conditioning but completely ignore decades of near-death experience research. Why? Because NDEs suggest consciousness exists independently of brain function, which undermines the materialist worldview that keeps people feeling powerless. The pharmaceutical angle is particularly insidious. I've seen the statistics. Anxiety and depression medications are among the most prescribed drugs in America. But how much of that anxiety stems from existential terror? Seth taught that understanding your eternal nature eliminates most psychological suffering at its root. Yet psychiatric training barely mentions consciousness research or spiritual experiences, instead focusing on chemical solutions to what are often spiritual problems. Then there's the media manipulation that Seth warned about extensively. Horror movies, violent news coverage, apocalyptic scenarios. They all reinforce the message that death is terrifying and final. I started paying attention to how death is portrayed in popular culture, and it's almost always either gruesome or tragic. When did you last see a movie that portrayed death as a natural transition to expanded consciousness? Government systems use death fear as their primary control mechanism. Every war is justified by protecting citizens from death. Every surveillance program is sold as preventing terrorist attacks. Every restriction on freedom comes with the promise of security. Seth explained, governments that cannot control through fear of death lose their power over conscious beings who understand their eternal nature. The suppression creates a self-perpetuating cycle. People afraid of death don't investigate consciousness research. They don't explore meditation or out-of-body experiences. They don't question materialist assumptions. This ignorance maintains the fear, which enables the control, which preserves the ignorance. What really struck me was Seth's insight that this suppression isn't necessarily conscious conspiracy. Most people within these systems genuinely believe they're helping. Doctors think they're healing. Teachers think they're educating. Politicians think they're protecting. But they're all operating within frameworks that require death to be final and terrifying. I've witnessed the marginalization firsthand. Researchers studying reincarnation memories in children get labeled as fringe scientists. Physicians investigating near-death experiences face professional ridicule. Psychologists exploring consciousness survival lose tenure opportunities. The academic establishment protects materialist orthodoxy like a religious doctrine. Seth's teachings threaten this entire control structure because they empower individuals with direct knowledge of their eternal nature. When you understand that consciousness is primary and physical death is just a transition, you can't be manipulated through existential terror. You make decisions based on growth and joy rather than fear and survival. The pharmaceutical companies lose customers who no longer need anxiety medications. Religious institutions lose followers who don't need salvation. Governments lose citizens who won't trade freedom for security. Educational systems lose students who think for themselves rather than memorize approved information. This is why Seth's material was suppressed for decades. Not because it's false, but because it's true, and that truth transforms everything about how we live, govern ourselves, and relate to existence itself. The question isn't whether this suppression exists, it's whether you're ready to see beyond it. Think about this for a moment. We prepare extensively for birth, yet death remains this forbidden topic we avoid until crisis forces our hand. Seth taught that this backwards approach creates unnecessary suffering and confusion during one of the most important transitions we'll ever experience. According to Seth, death preparation should be as routine as prenatal classes. The problem is that the same institutions we discussed earlier profit enormously from keeping you terrified and unprepared. When you're panicked about death, you'll pay anything, accept any treatment, follow any authority figure who promises to delay the inevitable. But Seth provided incredibly detailed, practical instructions for conscious dying that completely transform the experience. Let me share what he taught Jane Roberts about navigating this transition with awareness and dignity. First, Seth emphasized that your beliefs at the moment of death literally shape your initial after-death experience. If you believe you'll face judgment, you'll create that reality. If you expect punishment or purgatory, that's what you'll encounter initially. This is why examining your death-related beliefs while you're healthy is crucial preparation work. Seth recommended a specific practice. Regularly visualize your death as a peaceful, conscious transition. Not morbidly, but practically. See yourself maintaining awareness as physical sensations fade. Imagine releasing attachment to your body the way you'd take off clothes at the end of a long day. Practice this mental rehearsal until it feels natural, even comforting. During the actual dying process, Seth taught that you'll experience predictable stages. Physical sensations will begin fading from your extremities inward. Your hearing will be the last sense to diminish, so assume dying people can hear everything you're saying. Your consciousness will start expanding beyond the confines of your skull. This expansion can feel frightening if you're unprepared, but Seth described it as incredibly liberating once you understand what's happening. The key technique Seth provided for maintaining consciousness during transition is what he called identity anchoring. As physical sensations fade, repeatedly remind yourself, I am consciousness having a physical experience, not a physical body having consciousness. This simple shift in self-identification prevents the panic that causes many people to lose awareness during dying. Seth was particularly specific about the moments immediately following physical death. You'll likely experience a period of confusion as you realize you're still conscious despite your body being non-functional. Many people waste precious time trying to re-enter their physical form or attempting to communicate with grieving relatives who can't perceive them clearly. Instead, Seth instructed, focus on your essential self, the part of you that existed before this lifetime and will continue afterward. Look for the beings of light who come to guide newly transitioned souls. These aren't religious figures unless that's what you need to see initially. They're aspects of your own higher consciousness and other souls who've volunteered to help with transitions. One of Seth's most practical teachings involved completing unfinished emotional business before death. Unresolved conflicts, unexpressed love, or persistent guilt create what he called psychic anchors that can trap consciousness in confused after-death states. This is why people report encounters with earthbound spirits who seem stuck or repetitive in their communications. Seth provided specific guidance for releasing these anchors. Write letters to people you need to forgive or ask forgiveness from, even if they're already dead or you never send the letters. The act of expressing these feelings dissolves the psychic charge. Practice gratitude for experiences that taught you important lessons, even painful ones. Consciously release any identity roles that no longer serve your soul's growth. For those supporting dying loved ones, Seth taught that your emotional state significantly impacts their transition. Desperate clinging, overwhelming grief, or frantic medical interventions can make it much harder for someone to release peacefully. Instead, give them explicit permission to go when they're ready. Tell them you'll be okay, and that you understand this is a natural transition, not a tragedy. Seth also addressed the controversial topic of maintaining consciousness versus accepting sedation during dying. He taught that while pain relief is appropriate, heavy sedation that eliminates awareness robs you of the opportunity to consciously participate in this profound experience. If possible, discuss your preferences with healthcare providers and family members while you're healthy. The practical applications extend beyond your own death preparation. Seth taught specific techniques for helping souls who've become confused or stuck after death. If you sense the presence of someone who's died but seems unable to move on, you can mentally communicate with them. Explain that they've died and need to look for the light or the guides waiting to help them. Sometimes a soul just needs someone to notice their confusion and point them in the right direction. Seth's teachings about death timing reveal another crucial preparation element. Souls often choose their exit points based on lessons completed or contracts fulfilled. Fighting these natural timing choices with excessive medical intervention can create suffering for everyone involved. This doesn't mean giving up on treatment, but rather staying tuned to the deeper wisdom about when continued physical existence serves the soul's purposes. Creating what Seth called a conscious death plan involves more than legal documents. Write down your beliefs about death, your hopes for the after-death experience, and your intentions for how you want to transition. include messages for loved ones and instructions for how you want to be remembered. This process clarifies your own thinking and removes fear through preparation. The profound insight Seth offered is that preparing for death actually enhances life. When you truly understand death as a transition rather than an ending, you stop living in constant fear of loss. You make bolder choices, love more openly, and pursue what genuinely matters to your soul rather than what society expects. Start your death preparation now, while you're healthy and clear-headed. Examine your beliefs, complete your emotional business, and practice conscious transition techniques. This isn't morbid planning. It's the ultimate life enhancement because it removes the fear that keeps most people trapped in small, safe existences. Seth taught that conscious death preparation is actually consciousness expansion preparation. Every technique that helps you die well also helps you live more fully right now. When you truly grasp what Seth revealed about the nature of consciousness and death, everything changes. Not just your perspective on dying, but your entire approach to living. You're no longer a fragile biological accident stumbling through a random universe toward inevitable extinction. You're an immortal being of consciousness who chose this physical experience for specific reasons, with full knowledge that your awareness continues eternally. This understanding completely reframes the meaning of your current life. Every challenge you face, every relationship you navigate, every decision you make, takes on deeper significance when you realize you're here by choice, not chance. The difficulties aren't punishments or random misfortunes. They're growth opportunities you selected before incarnating because your larger self knew they would expand your consciousness in ways that serve your eternal development. Seth taught that recognizing your immortal nature should make you more engaged with physical life, not less. When you understand that consciousness creates reality, and that you chose this particular physical experience, you become responsible for making it meaningful. You can't waste time blaming circumstances or other people when you know at the deepest level that your consciousness is shaping your experience. This knowledge transforms how you approach relationships. When you recognize that everyone you encounter is also an immortal being playing a temporary physical role, you begin seeing past their surface personality to their essential nature. That difficult family member, that challenging coworker, that person who triggers your deepest fears, they're all consciousness exploring different aspects of existence, just like you. Many of your closest relationships were actually planned before birth, souls agreeing to play specific roles in each other's development. Your career choices shift dramatically when you understand you're here for soul growth rather than just survival or status. Instead of asking, "What will make me the most money?" or "What will impress others?" you start asking, "What serves my consciousness development?" And, "How can I contribute to the expansion of awareness on this planet?" The work that truly fulfills you aligns with your soul's purposes for incarnating. Seth provided specific practices for maintaining awareness of your larger identity while fully engaging physical reality. Dream work becomes crucial because dreams are where you regularly communicate with your non-physical self and other consciousness. Keep a dream journal and pay attention to recurring themes, symbols, and guidance that appears during sleep. Your dreams often contain direct communication from your expanded self about your life direction. Meditation isn't about emptying your mind, but about expanding your awareness beyond physical boundaries. Seth recommended what he called psychological time, periods where you allow consciousness to flow freely without the constraints of linear thinking. During these sessions, insights about your immortal nature and current life purposes naturally emerge. Examining your beliefs becomes essential work because beliefs create your reality. Seth emphasized that many of your limiting beliefs about yourself, relationships, and possibilities stem from forgetting your immortal nature. When you catch yourself thinking, "I can't do that," or "That's impossible," ask whether this belief serves your growth or limits it. Remember that as consciousness, your creative power extends far beyond what physical focused thinking suggests. Living with this knowledge often creates isolation because most people around you still operate from fear-based beliefs about death and limitation. They're terrified of dying, desperate for security, competing for scarce resources, trying to control outcomes they can't control. Meanwhile, you're recognizing that death is transition, security comes from understanding your eternal nature, abundance flows from consciousness, and the only real control comes from taking responsibility for your own awareness. Seth advised sharing this knowledge carefully and only when others show genuine readiness. You can't force awakening on anyone, and attempting to do so often creates resistance. Instead, live as an example of what's possible when someone understands their immortal nature. Your peace in the face of challenges, your compassion for others' struggles, your creative approach to problems. These demonstrate the practical benefits of expanded awareness more effectively than any argument. Developing your psychic abilities becomes natural when you accept that consciousness isn't limited by physical boundaries. Practice telepathy with willing friends. Pay attention to your intuitive hunches about people and situations. Notice when you think of someone just before they contact you. These aren't coincidences, but evidence of consciousness operating beyond physical constraints. Learning to recognize guidance from your larger self requires distinguishing between ego-driven desires and soul-level knowing. Guidance from your immortal self feels expansive, loving, and aligned with growth even when it's challenging. It often asks you to move beyond comfort zones but never demands you harm yourself or others. This guidance might come through sudden insights, synchronistic events, or opportunities that appear at exactly the right moment. Seth envisioned humanity's future when enough people understand consciousness and death's true nature. Instead of societies built on competition for limited resources, we'd create cooperation based on recognizing our fundamental interconnection. When you know that harming others ultimately harms yourself because consciousness is unified at the deepest level, exploitation becomes impossible. When you understand that death is transition rather than ending, the desperate grasping that drives most conflict dissolves. This transformation starts with individuals like you who choose to live from expanded awareness rather than fear-based limitation. Every person who recognizes their immortal nature and begins creating from that understanding contributes to humanity's collective awakening. The choice facing you right now is clear. Continue operating from beliefs about death and limitation that keep you small and fearful, or begin the incredible journey of living as the immortal being you actually are. This isn't about blind faith, but about direct experience of your expanded nature through the practices Seth outlined. Your awakening doesn't require you to abandon physical life, but to engage it more fully from the perspective of eternal consciousness. You chose this experience for reasons your soul understands, even when your personality doesn't. Trust that choice. Honor it by living with the courage, compassion, and creativity that flow naturally from understanding your immortal nature. If this resonates with your deepest knowing and you're ready to begin living as the immortal being you truly are, comment, "I understood it," below.